Okay. Hi, everyone. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Tonight's program is Virtual Growing Warm Season Vegetables. Our speaker tonight is Laura Monczynski. Laura has been a master gardener for 20 years. She is also certified as a green gardener and a master composter. Her entire backyard is edible and organic with vegetables, herbs, fruit trees. Laura will be assisted tonight by Master Gardener Louise Christie, who will moderate the chat. If you have an option, forgive me. If you have an on-topic question, please post into the chat. Laura will answer as many questions as possible during breaks at the end. If your question does not get answered, the Master Gardener Help Desk is a great resource. Due to time restrictions, again, we will not be able to take any voiced-in questions, but I will be sharing the link to the Master Gardeners page that you will be able to ask questions at any time, even after this program. Also want to mention that we are having another Master Gardener program, Virtual Growing Fabulous Citrus. And that will be on April 21st at 4 p.m. And that is on SJPL's event page. And now I'm going to pass on the spotlight to Laura. So give me just one moment here. Let's see. Laura, spotlight for everyone. There we go.
Okay, thank you, Tiffany, and thanks to the library for hosting the Master Gardeners. And thank you, everybody, for coming to learn more about growing vegetables in the summer. I don't know how many have been already growing vegetables for many years, how many people started just last year, or how many people are looking to do it for the first time, but hopefully we can kind of cover what you're all looking for. And if you're having some questions about your garden, go ahead and post those in the chat. So what we'll be talking about tonight is why grow warm season vegetables, what you can grow in this time, where in your yard or patio or someplace else to put them, and then how to grow them. So we'll talk about preparing the garden, planting, maintaining it, and harvesting, which is ultimately why we're all doing it, right? Okay, so some of the benefits of growing your own food, maybe you've already done about it, maybe you're thinking about it for the first time, but it just tastes good. I mean, that's kind of the number one reason we do it. It tastes good. Picked right out of your garden, as opposed to growing 1,000 miles away, being picked when it's still green, shipped. And a lot of things will fully ripen only when they're still on the plant, still developing sugar. So you get maximum taste if they're right there on the plant. And you can pick them right when they're ready, bring them right in your house, or eat them right out in the garden. Another advantage of doing it is there are more varieties available. So take a look at this and see if you can figure out what's in that pan. Those are carrots. So if you go to the store, you find orange carrots. Carrots were supposedly originally purple. So if you grow your own, you can grow all of these different varieties. And also, if you're looking to get children interested in vegetables, a purple carrot's going to be fun for them, right? So introducing people to something different. So there are a lot more varieties if you grow it yourself. Organic, this is one of the main reasons that I like to grow my own vegetables. I want to know what's in it. I like to do organic. I know what's in the soil. I know what kind of fertilizer I used. I know everything that's in it. So that's one of the main things I'm looking at. That may or may not be important to you. For the environment, our food on average is grown shipped 1,500 miles to get to us. If you're just walking out into your own backyard, it's one reason people like to grow their own. And then bragging rights, it's fun, right? At our Master Gardener classes, we used to have, when we were meeting in person, we would have a brag table in the room, and people would just come in with interesting things they'd grown. Maybe it was something beautiful, maybe it was something big, maybe it was something that went very wrong, and just kind of to share those experiences. And sharing. This is one of the fun things about growing your own. People always appreciate, except maybe zucchinis on the doorstep in the middle of the night. But other than that, people usually appreciate. You can have friends over for a tomato tasting, and people are always happy to help you eat fresh vegetables. So I grow more than for myself. And then sometimes people will, if they have a lot of vegetables, too many for their friends and neighbors, or they're not going to the office right now, share with food banks. And unfortunately, we do have to consider we're going to share with wildlife a little bit, whether we plan to or not. So you may want to just make sure you have a few extras, you have enough for yourself. We will talk about some of what to do about some of those pests later on in the talk. Okay, so how do you decide what to grow? There's so much out there. What kind of vegetables, what varieties? And the more you get into it, the more you realize it's not just growing a cucumber. You can grow a straight eight, you can grow a Persian, which is small and grows quickly and prolific. You can grow Japanese or English, which are those long cucumbers, the thin ones with the thin skin that you find in the store, individually wrapped in plastic for like $1.50 each. You can grow that in your garden. You can grow pickling cucumbers. That's a different kind. So the more you get into it, the more you realize how much is out there, and deciding what to grow, how much to grow. Some of the things that people do to decide, I mean, first of all, it's what they like. Maybe they'll go to a farmer's market, try different things, and get different experiences with different varieties. Sometimes groups will do tastings. Some of the local nurseries we used to do with Master Gardeners tastings, where you can go taste different things with your friends, taste what they have. Look at seed catalogs, and they have descriptions of all the different vegetables and what they taste like, how big they grow, what the requirements are. So there's lots to choose from. Ask different gardeners. We have a lot of information about our website, and we'll give you some specific links for how you can find some different varieties. What do you like to eat? You may be wanting to eat healthier, and that's why you're looking to do a vegetable garden. But it really, the most important thing is what tastes good to you. What are you actually going to eat? And go, think beyond when you're trying to decide to plant, beyond eating fresh. There are a lot of other things you can do too. You're growing chilies. Maybe you can only grow so many, but maybe you can dry them and make chili powder or chili flakes. Chili jam, a lot of different things you can do. Put some in the freezer. You can grow herbs and dry those, and those can be very expensive in the small jars in the store. But if you grow it yourself and dry it, then you've got all different herbs. Maybe you have cabbage and you want to make kimchi out of it. Maybe you want to freeze food. There's a lot you can do. So kind of when you're figuring out what to do, think beyond just the fresh. Think about the different ways you can preserve and enjoy what's in your garden. Availability. So this is something that's really getting better and better all the time. It used to be you would go to the store and you would find a Red Delicious apple, maybe a Granny Smith. Now you can find maybe a dozen varieties just in the supermarket. And then if you go to farmers markets, there are even more varieties. So there's a lot more out there, but there are still things that are hard to find. I don't know if anybody's ever grown mâche. It's spelled M-A-C-H-E. It's a French green, but it's very small. So it's kind of hard to harvest commercially. And so you're going to have a real hard time finding that in the store. If that's something that you like, grow it in your own yard because it's hard to find. Some of these things that are hard to find too can be more expensive if you do it yourself. So kind of balance. It may be something that you can grow yourself. So maybe I remember somebody telling me once that, yeah, he likes zucchini, but it's 39 cents a pound in season, or people give it to you free. So he doesn't use the space to grow zucchini. He uses it to grow arugula. And I thought, yeah, you don't really see arugula in the store very much. It's very easy to grow at home. I planted it once 15 years ago, and it's been reseeding itself ever since. So that's something to consider too, things that are easy to keep going. Maybe they're perennial, maybe they reseed themselves, or you can save seeds from it. So just all things to consider. How much space you have. So you may have just a patio, and that's fine. You can grow in containers on the patio, and we'll talk about some of the special things you do when you grow in containers. You can find a little strip like this where you can grow. Sometimes people will grow in their front yard to get a little extra space. Community gardens are another way. If you don't have enough room in your own yard, to grow, you can use community gardens. Sometimes a neighbor or a family member will have some space. It's like, hey, can I use your space and grow a little bit, and I'll give you half the food and I'll take half. And so kind of be creative. We actually have a master gardener who has containers on the diving board of her pool. So if you really want to, lots of times you can find a little bit of space, but that's something that's really, most of our yards are kind of small, so that's looking for more space can be difficult. One is there's something called bio-intensive method of gardening. You may have heard of square foot gardening, how to grow things in a small space and how to organize them. There are a lot of books out there about that website. That's a way to get more. Also, vertical gardening can make good use of space. Maybe instead of growing bush beans, you grow pole beans that grow more vertical. And even some things other things that grow as vines, like cucumbers, you can train them up a trellis or a pole, and it doesn't take as much real estate, and then you can get more things in the ground. So you think creatively about space, because it can be limiting. And then water requirements. So this is a really important one to a lot of people. I hear so many people say, but it uses so much water. I'd like to grow my own, but it uses so much water. And this year in San Jose, we're actually, as of today, only at 39% of normal rainfall for this date. So we're facing a drought again this year. So we want to be careful. But in the bigger picture, it actually uses less water if you grow it yourself than if it's grown commercially. So you think about things growing commercially, you see these big sprinklers going in the fields during the day. A lot of that is lost to evaporation. I mean, if it's sunny and windy and you're watering during the day, you can lose up to 90% to evaporation. So when you're watering in your own yard and you're watering right to the roots of the plants, it's much more efficient. You're not using water. Also, you go to the supermarket and they mist the vegetables every few minutes. So they're using water there. Then you bring it home and you're going to wash it more thoroughly if it's been out and handled by a whole lot of different people. Whereas if you go out to your backyard where you've just watered right to the root, early in the morning where there's not as much evaporation, and maybe just rinse it off a little bit with the dust because it's pretty clean. There's actually a lot less water used in the big picture. The thing is, it's on your water bill. So, but it may make you feel better to know that you're actually using less water if you grow it yourself than if you buy vegetables that were grown commercially. Just something to consider. Okay, so before we go into that, any questions, Louise, up to here?
We do have a question about garden towers for growing vertically. What do you think of them? Are you familiar with them?
I'm not sure exactly what that phrase means. I mean, they're all different things that you can grow up. I don't know if that's a particular brand or something. But, there are a lot of things that you can do to grow vertically. I put like metal poles in the ground with kind of concrete reinforcing wire that they can grow up in. I have some rebar that I have right in the ground that vining vegetables can twirl up around. I also sometimes will save kind of branches, long kind of thin branches to make a teepee. where things can grow up. So there are a lot of different ways, different things you can use a trellis for things to grow vertically. So I'm not sure if that's a particular product, but yes, anything that will get the vegetables to grow vertically. So anything that grows on a vine, that the fruit is not too heavy, like a watermelon might be too heavy. But some of the smaller squash, some of the cucumbers, peas, beans, a lot of things can grow on vines that way.
And then we also have a question about companion planting, especially with flowers. Will you be talking about that?
I really don't have anything in there about that. There are a lot of books on companion planting. People talk about tomatoes and basil together. I think that's just because you use them at the same time. But there are a lot of plants. There are some things like marigold that will repel pests that you can plant in your garden. And then there are a lot of other flowers that will attract pests. And I don't get into the flowers, but I do mention that in there's an IPM slide, integrated pest management. So interplanting flowers with your vegetables is great because then they come and they help pollinate your plants. So that's a wonderful thing to do. But in terms of specific what chemicals and sharing nutrients and what uses more, I would just recommend getting a book about companion planting out of the library. Anything else?
I think you can go on now.
Okay. Yeah, companion planting would be a whole, it's a great question. It's a whole topic, but definitely recommend planting flowers in your vegetable beds or at the edge to attract pollinators. And they will pollinate the fruit, and they will also take care of some of the pest problems you might have. And we'll mention that a little bit later. Okay, so next is how to set up your garden. So, you don't want to go necessarily get a 6-pack of plants before you know where you're going to put them. So a couple of things to consider. One is, are you going to plant it in the ground? So advantage of the ground is it's already there. So some people just like to do it right in the ground, maybe in rows, maybe in groupings. We do have in Santa Clara County, I don't know if there's anybody here who's outside the county, but in Santa Clara County, we have clay soil, which is actually, it can be a little difficult to work with, but it's a good thing to start with because it has small particle sizes that hold on to water and nutrients really well. So we're really fortunate to have that to start with. And we'll talk about how to kind of improve that to make it a little bit easier to work and improve the drainage. Another option is raised beds. So these are becoming more and more popular. You can kind of define the space a little bit better. It's good if it's hard for you to maybe bend over as far, holds it up a little bit better. Also, you can manage better the soil that's in there. You can put all potting mix or some kind of special soil in there. You can put some of the native soil, some from the ground, and mix it in. So you've got kind of a loose soil in there. But it's more controlled. And it also helps with pests. Some people have problems with gophers in their yards, and gophers will actually eat the roots of the plants, and they'll sometimes pull the plant down right in the ground. I've actually stood and watched them pull a plant of mine underground. And so with these raised beds, you can put hardware cloth in the bottom, which is kind of a 1/2-inch screening. And it keeps anything from being able to dig up from underneath. So it's helpful that way in controlling pests. Also, snails and slugs can be a problem, and they won't go over copper barriers. So you could put a copper strip around the top of that bed. Also, we'll go to, actually, let's go to, so raised beds can actually be very raised so that you can stand and garden if that's easier for you to do, or even get a wheelchair in under that. So you can put it at whatever height you want. A lot, and materials, a lot of them use wood, some may use concrete blocks. If you do use wood, you don't want to use pressure treated wood or railroad ties that have creosote that have chemicals. So you want to be careful what kind of wood. Redwood tends to be good because it tends to resist pest and water more, and age as well. And then containers. So if we're going really small, so containers have a lot of good uses. If you have just an apartment with a patio, you can do containers. This is a friend of mine who used containers to get sun. So along the back, you can see all those Italian cypress trees that are blocking the sun where all the soil is, where all the ground is. And vegetables need a lot of sun. So what he does is he gets sun on his patio, which is hardscape. So he grows everything in containers. Couple of things you want to look at. And another use for containers too is sometimes a plant will need a very specific kind of soil. Carrots that might need a really loose soil. And you don't necessarily want to amend a whole space in the ground. So if you grow it in a container, then you can have a specialized soil blend in that. Containers are also good for what we call garden thugs. Plants that spread like crazy, something like mint that will spread all over with the roots. If you put it in a container, then you don't end up through the whole yard. But containers, anything you plant in needs to have some drainage holes in the bottom. So make sure you turn it maybe every time you water it so that you don't allow roots to escape through those holes and go in. So a couple of things special when you're using containers is you do need a looser soil. You can't just dig up that clay soil out of your yard and put that in the container because you'll end up with like a block of cement in there if it dries out. So you do need a looser soil. Maybe you can mix a little of your native soil, but you do need looser soil. And then you also have to make sure to stay on top of watering and fertilizing, because once it has used up what's in the container, it can't get any more. If you have something in the ground or in a raised bed on top of the ground, those roots can go really far in search of water and nutrients. In a container, they can't. So you have to kind of stay on top. So that's the only caveat with containers. You have to make sure to water and fertilize regularly, but a great way to get extra space. Sometimes too, you can move things around to follow the sun if you only have sun in certain parts during the day. So I mentioned our soil with our clay soil. So we think of the ground as being all solid, but it's not. It's really only about half solid and then half pore spaces for air and water. And so a lot of it, almost half of it is mineral particles. And then we have organic matter, which is compost. It's the critters that live in there. It's plant material that's breaking down. All that's organic matter. And minerals is almost half of it. So those mineral particles, you hear about clay soil, loamy soil, sand soil, it's all the same substance. It's just the size of the particles. So clay particles are very small. So they have a lot of surface area, which enables them to hold on to water and nutrients well, which is why clay is a great thing to start with. This bottle on the bottom is clay soil, and you can see how when you water it, it sits on top for a while and it takes quite a while to drain through. Whereas opposed sand, which has very large particles, it drains through really quickly, and those nutrients are lost really quickly. So any of those things you can use compost to amend it and make it looser, increase drainage, so improving your soil. So clay is great to start with, but as you saw, water doesn't penetrate very well. It can be hard for the roots to penetrate. It can get compacted easily, especially if you walk on it when it's wet. That's another advantage of the raised beds. You can just walk on the paths and not walk in the beds where you're planting stuff. So you're not compacting the soil and the root space. And so in order to make it looser so that you can work with it better, so that there's more air space, it's easier for water to get in, all those beneficial soil organisms, there's a lot that we want to live in the soil, good bacteria, good fungus, worms, all sorts of critters that we want living in the soil. They're living organisms, they need air and water. And if it's hard compacted clay, it's hard for them to get that. So a few different things you can use. That picture on the left is actually horse manure, composted horse manure. That was a birthday present. Isn't that a wonderful birthday present for a gardener? So manure is fine to use if it's from an herbivore, not a carnivore. You don't want anything that eats meat because that's pathogens that can be spread. And also, if it's already well composted, it's fine to put on. If it's fresh, it's very high in nitrogen and hot, and it can burn your plants. So you can either compost it first before you put it in, or maybe if you have an area that you're not planting at the moment, you're kind of rotating, you can put it on there fresh and then give it time to kind of break down and seep in naturally. The worms will carry it into your soil. Great amendment for soil. Compost in the middle with the pumpkins. So putting your yard waste in there. Louise is going to put a link in the chat for our home composting program. So we have a program in our county where you can take 2-hour free classes and learn about composting. But you put all your yard's waste in there, you kind of keep it wet, you turn it to aerate it, and it breaks down into this kind of humus, is really rich soil, which is great to use in your garden. And then you're kind of completing the cycle, you're keeping it all on your property. You don't want to put anything diseased or with seeds that you don't want to propagate, like weed seeds. But other than that, great thing to do right there on your property. And then also on the bottom right, cover crops are another way of improving your soil. So lots of times in community gardens, you see all these fava beans in the winter. Buckwheat is something in the summer. So they're different cover crops. And what they'll do is they'll put down the roots, they'll help loosen up the soil and break that down. And some of these, in the legume family, like fava beans, they actually pull nitrogen from the air into the soil. And nitrogen is one of the nutrients that your plants most need. So it's a great way to keep your soil from washing away during the winter so you don't have bare soil. Adding nitrogen, and then you can chop those up, mix them right into your soil, or put them in your compost bin and be improving your garden the whole time naturally. Irrigation is something that you want to figure out before you plant it, because if you don't figure it out and it's hard to water, things will die. So I mentioned that you want to get water to where the roots are. We don't want to be wasting water. We don't want it blowing up into the air. We don't want evaporating. We don't want it running off down the street. And we really don't want it to go too deep below the roots because that's kind of wasted. So plants that are smaller, that have shallow roots, you wouldn't water as much as a plant that's bigger and has deeper roots, where you want to water it down deeper. But remember, the clay will hold on to the water well, so you don't want to do it too frequently because you don't want it to rot. So some of the most common ways, there are furrows or a lot of different things, are drip emitters. So there's this tubing and there are little emitters that come off and target water to right where that plant is. So that's good when you have things that are individual, not large, but sizable plants like eggplant or something like that, as opposed to maybe a row of lettuce or herbs that are smaller and in a row. So drip emitters can be really good for that because you can see how they just target one area. So you're getting it right to the root zone. So there's not a lot of waste. Soaker hose in the middle is water seeps through the whole length of that hose slowly. That's good if you're planting things in rows. And then hand watering. So hand watering, first of all, you have to be there. You can't just set it up on a timer like the others or go on vacation unless you have a friend and neighbor who will watch it. But having to be there is a really good thing because a really important thing in your garden is observation. You want to see what's going on in your garden. If you have something on timers, it may be 2 weeks before you get out there because you're busy. And in the meantime, something's come through and eaten half your plants. Or some disease has really gotten on top of it. So you want to catch those things early, plus see when fruit's ripening and spend time in your garden. So hand watering, you kind of have to do that. So I like that. This kind of head, like a dram head or something, has many, many holes. It can have 400 little holes, or there's one that has 1,000. So it gives it a really gentle watering, and you can get it down there to where the roots are. You want to make sure to water regularly. Don't let things stay soaking wet because you don't want to drown the organisms in there, the beneficial organisms. You don't want to rot the roots. You want that space for air. And then you don't want to let it get too dry because that really stresses the plants. And stressed plants tend to have more disease problems too. So regular watering where you let it just maybe dry out 50% and then give it some more water. How often depends on, what you're growing, what your soil's like, if it's in the ground, in the container. If they're young seedlings, you may want to be watering them every day. If it's established plants in the ground, vegetables, it might be once or twice a week, depending on your soil type and what your plant is in. And what the plant is. Some need more. And then early morning is usually the best, so that it's not evaporating while you're watering. Gives a little bit of time to soak in. But also if you're watering, especially if you get overhead watering on leaves later in the day and that stays on there a long time or stays on overnight, that's a really good environment for fungal infections, for diseases. So you kind of want to be careful about that. So you want to water when there's still time for it to penetrate and then dry out on the foliage so it doesn't sit there. However, water when it's convenient. If you're at work all day and the evening is the only time, or that's your time to go relax in the garden, that's okay. Just be a little careful about not having water setting on the leaves. And that's why I didn't show sprinklers here. It works great for a lawn, but individual vegetables, you get a lot on the leaves as opposed to targeting the roots. Okay. So any questions about that, Louise? Do we have any?
Yes, we have several questions. Let's just see if we can do a couple of them now.
Okay.
Are rubber or plastic containers okay for vegetables?
That's kind of your preference. Yeah, I kind of don't really like plastic a lot, but that's kind of what you can find. In terms of containers, plastic, one advantage is it's lightweight, it's easy to move. Also, they're kind of easier to find and they don't dry out as fast. The terracotta pot or wood are more natural, but they absorb some of the water too. And so you may have to water them a little more frequently, but they're more natural. So it really depends on your level of tolerance for plastic. I'm not crazy about it, but I do use it some.
It's not going to harm anyone if you grow vegetables in plastic containers.
Okay. I don't drink out of plastic water bottles. I use metal, but
okay.
It's your preference. I use it more than I'm comfortable with.
Okay. Another question is, are you familiar with fabric containers and what do you think of them for growing vegetables?
Yeah, that's great. Again, it doesn't hold the water in. It will wick a little bit of the moisture and they'll dry out a little bit more, but that's fine. Organic cotton, something like that. Some people use like burlap bags. Some people actually as a container just grow the bag that the soil comes in. But yes, I think fabric is great. Some people grow in hay bales.
All kinds of things.
Uh-huh.
Can you comment, this will be the last one for now, but can you comment on which vegetables are best for containers and which vegetables are best for raised beds or in the ground?
Okay. The bigger vegetables you have to be careful with because you have to have a really large container. So the ones that you have to be most careful with are things like tomatoes that the roots will go down a couple of feet if they have room. So you want to make sure it would be maybe a 15-gallon minimum size. I do have a picture because that's what I grow my tomatoes in, or a half wine barrel. So that's really the only consideration is if there's space for the roots. But as long as the container is the right size, I'd grow any vegetables in containers or herbs.
That's great. I think we could move on. Okay. We're collecting lots of questions here.
Okay. So now you're ready to plant, right? Now you're ready to put your vegetables in. You've got your garden laid out. You have the irrigation set up. You have your soil all nice and ready for them. So consider where you want to get your vegetables. So Louise is going to put a link in the chat about vegetables from our website and picking them out. But, you know, for $3, you can go to the store and get zucchini for dinner, or you can go to the nursery and get a pot, a transplant, one plant, and eat pretty well all summer. Or you can buy a seed packet, plant a whole row, and feed the whole neighborhood. So, that, you know, that's just one of the considerations. So, starting plants from seed. So, there are more varieties available if you do that. It costs less. It does take more time because you've got a couple months there before the time that a transplant would be ready. So, you know, as long as you have the time, I really find it very satisfying to grow from seed. When that seed germinates, it's like creating life. And so I love to start things from seed, mostly for that. But there are a lot of different reasons and pros and cons to everything. So there's no right or wrong. This is just your choice, what works well for you. So if you are planting from seed, some of the supplies you might need are pots. You don't have to go out and buy pots. You can, if you see somebody planting stuff at a maybe shopping center, you say, oh, can I have your pots? And they'd be happy to give them to you so as not to throw them away. You can use a milk carton. You can use a yogurt container. You can make them out of newspaper, and you can even buy like a mold to do that. The most important thing, though, is make sure there are drainage holes in the bottom. So if it doesn't already have them, drill holes in them or poke holes in them. If you're starting indoors, you're going to want to put those in trays so you don't water the floor when you do it. That soil you use is potting soil. It's going to be hard if you take clay out of your garden and try to put it in these little pots. So you want a loose potting soil. You don't necessarily need a seed starting mix. So you may have seen that in the stores. And that's a very loose, light, fluffy soil. If you have like really delicate fine seeds, you might want that, but usually it's way more expensive and it's really not necessary, just regular potting soil. Not necessarily planting mix because that's going to have little pieces of wood in it. It's going to have a lot of fertilizer that may be too much for the tender young plants. So just kind of a straight potting soil. Lots of times you would want a heat source because we're trying to mimic conditions in nature, and most seeds need a little heat to germinate. So you can buy a seed heating mat. That to the left is an old waterbed heater. So a lot of things you can use. People used to talk about putting it on top of the refrigerator because of the heat on top of the refrigerator, but they're so energy efficient right now, heat doesn't escape. But hot air rises, it is warmer towards the ceiling. Also bottom middle labels. So you think you're going to remember, but make sure to label them. And you can put whatever you want. You can just put tomato. You can put the variety. You can put the seed company. You can put the date you did it. You can put the date on the seeds, whatever information you want, or just put a little there and write the information, a log if you want to remember for the future. I just buy these popsicle sticks at a craft store, and it's like 1,000 for $3 or something. Plus they're wood, so I can throw them in the compost bin. But you can, like those yogurt containers, you can cut up and make it. People make them out of old blinds that they'll cut up. Anything that you want to use for that. And then lights. You're going to need lights once they start growing, especially if you're starting indoors. If they were outside, they would have sunlight, but they don't have that. So you want to mimic conditions of nature as much as possible. So number one, read the seed packet. So it will tell you when to plant it. It will tell you how deep to plant the seeds. Now, if you don't have seeds, if you've saved seeds or somebody gave you, kind of rule of thumb is 2 or 3 times the diameter of the seed is how deep you want to plant that, and just some really light soil over that. Also, you usually plant more than what you think you're going to need because you won't get 100% germination. So it will tell you how much to thin them. So when you thin them, instead of yanking them out, if you've got a few together, is cut them right at soil level, because if you yank them out and pull the roots, it will damage the roots of the plants that you're saving, the little seedlings. Put soil in the pots. It's really helpful if you wet the soil overnight. That potting soil can be hydrophobic. It can take a while to really soak up the water. So if you put dry soil in and plant it, it's going to take a long time to get that wet. You may wash the seeds away from the spot you put them. So I usually put it in a bucket with water and soak them maybe overnight or maybe just a couple of hours. And then I take it out and put it in there. That way, when I put the seed, I just lightly water that in and I don't have to worry about soaking the whole thing. You want to pack the soil down a little bit because when you water, it's going to settle some. So you want to know what it's going to settle to. So just pack it very lightly and then leave a little headspace for water. I do want to mention, if you're reusing pots, you want to make sure they're clean, because if there was some kind of fungal disease, some kind of pathogen in there, you want to get rid of that. So you can just wash it out with like a 10% bleach solution. So 1 part bleach to 9 parts water, and clean that out to get any pathogens if you don't know where that pot has been. So then you're getting ready to plant the seed. So I don't know if you've ever looked inside a seed, but on the left, this is a scarlet runner bean seed. So you can see there's that seed coat, which is very colorful on that, which is why I chose this one. And that coat needs moisture and oftentimes heat to break down, so that seeds don't just sprout whenever. They, in nature, will sprout when the conditions are going to be right. So, you know, if you had some seeds fall from your plants last year, they're not going to start to sprout until the weather warms up or until they get enough rain or whatever conditions in nature they do. And then you can see, I don't see if you can see with my cursor, inside that is that tiny little plant. So that's like the embryo. So you've got the whole plant inside there. And then the rest of this in there is endosperm. That's food for the seedling to power it until it can get up above the soil into the sun and then make its own food through photosynthesis. So when it first germinates, it puts down this little radicle, it's called. It's a little root first, and then the shoot goes up. And then these are the seed leaves, and then it'll open up and grow from there. So once you get it in there, cover it with a little soil or vermiculite that's very light. And you want to keep that uniformly moist, because if it starts to germinate and it dries out and you've got this tiny little root, the whole plant will die. So you want to keep it moist until it germinates. So either you can very lightly sprinkle it, you know, a few times a day, or you can cover it with plastic wrap to keep it uniformly moist. Once you see it start to germinate, take that wrap off so that it doesn't rot under there. And then we have germination. So you can see the one seedling still has that seed head on there. It hasn't kicked it off yet. So this is what you'll see starting. And this is a really exciting part of gardening. Once it germinates, you want to make sure it has light. If it were outdoors, it would have sunlight. If you have it indoors, now you may have it outdoors, you may have a protected area, maybe a greenhouse, maybe a table with an awning over it. But lots of times, if you're starting early, if you're trying to get a head start and starting maybe in January, February, March, when it's still cold outside, you might want to do that inside. So you have to provide them with a light. And so these, and you want to keep it just a couple inches above the top of the leaves as it grows up, so that it's strong enough light. If it's not, it will grow really tall and leggy to try to find light, and it can just fall over. It's so weak. So you want to keep them kind of nice and sturdy there. So this is a system where I can unscrew these and move them up. This is a homemade thing. In terms of what kind of lights, so you can get grow lights specifically for plants that will have the full spectrum that plants would need, mimicking the sun. What I do is I just use regular fluorescent shop lights. These are like 4-foot tubes, and I alternate warm light, cool light, warm light, cool light. So I'm kind of getting a full spectrum without buying the specialized lights, but you can do that. And also LED lights. You know, I've had these a while, but when I replace them, I'm going to replace them with LED lights. But that's really important. If you don't have light, if you put it in a window, it'll help some, but it's not quite as strong. It's better than nothing. So in a south-facing window, if you can't find these kinds of lights until it's ready to go outside in the sun, where it's kind of designed to be. So in terms of when to transplant it, so you'll have these true leaves that start to appear. That first set of leaves is the seed leaves. That's kind of what was inside. The first true leaves are the ones that can photosynthesize. So once it can photosynthesize and make its own food, then it can be ready to transplant anytime. They may grow bigger before the soil is warm enough to put them out. So you can see these chili plants in the back, I've up potted to 1 gallon pots because they're outgrowing these 4-inch pots, but it's still too cold in the ground to put them in there. So you can kind of up pot them as they go until the conditions are right inside. And when you start to put them outside, you want to kind of do it gradually. They've been inside with, not direct sun, no wind. It can be kind of a shock to uniform temperature, can kind of be a shock to go outside. So you might want to take them out for maybe an hour or two the first day and make it a little bit longer until they're a little bit stronger. And that might take maybe a week, maybe 2, until you can just leave them out all the time. And then when the soil is right, go ahead and transplant them. Here's an example of transplanting. So you see on the right, once it gets down into the ground where it has more room for the roots, it has more nutrients, it can start to grow, and you can see how much bigger and healthier. This one on the left, these are Peruvian purple peppers. Believe it or not, I planted all of those seeds at the same exact time. But you can see as I up pot them and they have more room to grow, more room for the roots, more nutrients in there, they grow bigger. So the one on the left, the one on the right, very different. So make sure that you're up potting them as they're getting bigger. Or, you can just start at the transplant part and, skip that whole part. If maybe you're still eating summer vegetables or winter vegetables and you want that space, you can just start right at the transplant and skip those first few steps. So you can go to the nursery and find the seedlings already started. You don't want to look for something that's really tall because maybe that wasn't getting enough light, and it's not going to be as strong as something that's a little short and stocky and sturdy. You can pull them out of the container a little bit or look at the bottom, make sure it's not too root bound. There are going to be more roots in there, and that's fine. You can kind of spread them around, but if they're really compacted, there's hardly any soil. If they're circling around, it may be harder to loosen them when you plant them. And you can see on the right, you normally want to plant them right at the same soil level that they were in the pot. Tomatoes are an exception. You can plant those deeper, and I have a picture of those, but usually you plant them at the same level they were in the pot. I usually dig a hole and I'll put maybe some compost, a little bit of fertilizer, some loose soil in the planting hole when I do it to kind of give it a start. And always when you transplant something, water it in right away. So sometimes I'll water the soil first so I don't have to do a whole lot and wash away all that fertilizer. Get the soil around it wet, put that in, water it in a little bit, and go from there. And I'm already on my way. I've already started at the transplant stage. You can also direct seed in the ground. So for root vegetables, something like carrots, when you transplant, you're always going to damage some of the roots. So something where it is a root vegetable, you don't want to damage that root. So starting those right in the ground or container or raised bed or wherever you're putting them. Also, some of the bigger things like beans and peas, where they've got the big seed, you can put those right in the ground. It's a lot easier to control them there. They're not as likely to wash away or be eaten. You can plant them a little bit deeper because they're bigger. So it's less likely to have a bird digging them up or something. So these are times when you're direct seeding. But summer vegetables, the soil is still warm. They're not going to germinate. I mentioned with the seed, it needs water and usually some heat to generate. They're not going to germinate. They're not going to germinate when it's still really cold. So you may need to wait a while, depending on what it is. Winter vegetables will be fine. Label them again in the ground. And if they're going to need support, if it's a big heavy plant or if it's something that grows on a vine, put the support in early when you first plant it, because otherwise, you're going to be damaging roots when you put something down into the ground. You're going to break off branches when you're trying to wrestle it in. So go ahead and put those in right at the time that you plant it. Okay, before we go on, Any questions here, Louise?
Oh, yes, we have lots of questions.
Okay, well, we'll just do a couple now.
Just do a couple. Okay. Can you comment on how to avoid leggy seedlings?
Yeah, just give them enough light. Give them strong light.
And it's got to be really strong and close down if you're using those artificial lights, right?
Yeah, within 2 inches if you can, yes.
You made a comment about alternating the fluorescent lights. Can you clarify that?
Well, there are warm lights and there are cool lights, and there are different spectrums on the, lighting spectrum. So the sun has, cool and warm and all different level of lights. I don't know the technology to explain lighting, but cool lights are a different level than warm, so you get a broader spectrum of light.
Okay, that makes sense. Did you want to go on then?
Yeah, let's go on, and we'll do some more at the end. I know there are a lot of questions, and there's just so much to learn about vegetable gardening. I've been still learning for 20 years. So when you first put them in when they're young, you may want to protect them a little bit. That's one reason I like to kind of start them in pots and get them a little bit stronger before I put them in. If they're really young and tender, they can be easily eaten. One year I planted my lettuce in the ground 4 times and it kept getting eaten. So now I plant it in a container because it's it's just too young and tender and delicious. Water it regularly, so you don't want to keep a water log, but you don't want it to dry out too much. So just kind of keep on top. We mentioned that with watering. And then fertilizer. So with your vegetables, what you're doing is you're growing them and then you're taking off a lot of the nutrients. So you kind of have to replace them. As you eat the fruit, as you eat the vegetables, you need to replace that. So you can use a lot of different natural things. You can use worm castings, you can use chicken, what's a polite word? Anyway, chicken manure. You can use seaweed, you can buy a fertilizer. A couple of things to consider: synthetic versus organic. So organic actually feeds the soil and the organisms in the soil, and you get this full healthy ecosystem that's kind of sustainable because it has a lot of natural products in it, and it will tell you on the label. A synthetic one will get the nutrients to the plant, but it really doesn't do anything around the soil. So it kind of becomes a thing where you have to keep adding it, kind of like a drug. In a container, that really doesn't matter, but maybe if you're doing in the ground or a larger bed, you might want to consider getting a whole ecosystem going that's sustainable. And don't ever give more than what's on the label, because if it grows too fast, you may get a lot of tender growth that will attract pests. So follow the label directions, depending on what you're growing, how much your soil's been amended with compost or whatever. You might do it every 2 weeks or once a month. When you have the young seedlings, you might want to do it half strength, but just don't ever do more. So what fertilizers do, you have these 3 different numbers always on the label if you buy it, NPK. So the N refers to nitrogen, which is for the green growth. So if you're doing something that's mostly green, you want a lot of nitrogen, spinach, lettuce. Phosphorus is for the fruit and roots. So tomatoes, you might want a little bit higher number of tomato fertilizer might say something like 573. Whereas a grass fertilizer might be 2100, and then potassium is for overall strength. So mulching, you want to kind of hold those nutrients, hold the moisture in, keep weed seeds from germinating. In your summer garden, you might want to wait until the sun warms up the soil a little bit before you put mulch on. It's like putting on a blanket. So that can help if you wait a little bit, but that will help a lot in terms of weeding and keeping moisture in. And then controlling weeds. Weeds will compete for sun, they'll compete for space, they'll compete for water and nutrients, they'll grow like anywhere. So you want to stay on top of them. You want to get them before they go to seed, or if they propagate another way by roots or something, you want to make sure what that is and get it out as soon as possible. But keep in mind on the right, some weeds are edible. This is purslane, one of my favorites. So I try to encourage that weed. And then pests and diseases. So, this is a whole other topic. We could go on for hours about pests and diseases. But a couple of things I want to mention is a strong jet of water takes care of a lot of things. If you have aphids, a lot of bugs, strong jet of water will take care of a lot of them, knock them off. Some of them will crawl back up, do it a few times, that can take care of them. Ladybugs, everybody knows ladybugs are wonderful because they eat a lot of pests. You may not recognize right here is the larval stage of the lady beetle. And that actually eats more aphids than the adult stage. So if you see something crawling, don't automatically assume it's bad and squish it. So kind of get to know the different stages of these beneficials. And we talked about flowers attracting a lot of these beneficials. A lot of herbs too, if you let them go to seed, like cilantro or something like that, they really attract a lot. I let my celery go to seed. I get more ladybugs on my celery than anything else. Some people use sticky traps, but you want to be careful because you can trap the beneficials also. They're better for monitoring to see what kind of pests you have. A lot of pests will breathe through their skin, so smothering them with a little bit of soap or oil, maybe a spoonful in a teaspoon of water. And I'm going to go on, Louise, here, and we'll take a couple of questions after this. So in terms of what to grow when, we had put this in the chat for choosing vegetables, but this chart is on our website. I still use it all the time. And it will tell you, so this is January, February, March. So if you look down, it says, yes, you can plant potatoes now, you can plant radishes, spinach, summer squash, you want to wait a month. So you can see what's there and whether to transplant it or direct seed. So go to our website and look that up, and just gives you some really good information about what to plant when. So I just want to touch on a couple things that are common, some of the more commonly grown ones. Tomatoes. I always tell people, if you plant one thing in your garden, plant tomatoes, because that's where you get the biggest difference between store-bought and what you grow in your garden. So there are all different kinds of tomatoes. Louise will put in the chat a list that we have on our website of, I don't know, 100 some different tomatoes and the different characteristics, flavor, size, couple things. So this is where you can see on the left where in the 1 gallon pot, this is where the roots are. And I planted it deep and you get more roots. Tomatoes are really about the only thing you want to do that with, maybe peppers. These on the right are the tomatoes. I plant them in 15-gallon pots with this concrete reinforcing wire. The things that are sold as tomato cages tend not to be as strong. Part of the reason I use containers is because tomatoes get a disease, which I'll show you on the left, called verticillium wilt, that lives in the soil for a long time. So if they get that disease and I have them in the ground, I cannot plant tomatoes or anything else in that family, which includes peppers, eggplants, and potatoes, in that same place for about 3 years until that population, the pest, goes down. If I have it in a container, I can either throw away that soil or put it maybe in my half wine barrels with citrus. It's not affected by that disease. Clean out the pot with that 10% bleach solution, put in new soil, and then I can use it again. So that's part of why I do that. Tomato russet mite, where you have this bronziness on it. Sulfur can help with that. Blossom end rot is something that you see a lot in tomatoes. That's not a disease. That is what happens when the calcium doesn't get all the way to the end of the plant, and that comes from uneven water. So it's not something where you're adding calcium to the soil. Tomato hornworm is a pest that can do a lot of damage. So those are some of the common things that you see. We have, Louise probably put the IPM, Integrated Pest Management notes, where you can, this is on a University of California website, you can put in, if you know the pest or the disease and find out the life cycle and what to do about it, Or if you don't know, you can know the plant and you can put in the name of the plant and it will tell you what normally affects that plant and you can kind of go from there. So peppers are another thing that people plant a lot here. I find the hotter the peppers, the fewer pest and disease problems they have. And actually peppers are something that are used for pest control, you know, sprinkling powder around or something, because a lot of pests don't like that heat. Giant whitefly is something that you might see. It doesn't usually do a lot of damage. It has that distinctive curly pattern, and you can kind of get this white beard under it sometimes. Lots of times just spraying it off with water helps. Sun scald, if they don't have enough leaf cover, so you want to make sure they get enough nitrogen so they have good leaf cover, they can sunburn. Nothing wrong with that. You can cut it out. So not everything is a pest and disease. Some is just the conditions of them growing. And sometimes you'll find stuff that will be chewed up, and I'll refer you to the IPM notes for that. Beans are another common one in the summer. The thing you really want to be careful with beans is you want to keep on top of them and pick them regularly. You can see that inside the pod, those beans, those are the seeds. And once a plant puts out its seeds, it's completed its life cycle and it can die. So you want to keep it from thinking it's completed its life cycle. So you want to kind of keep picking those. Squash, very, very common, popular. You can get, that's a very high yield plant. So you can just plant a few plants and get a lot out of them if you're looking to utilize your space well. Tomatoes, cucumber, squash are very high yield. You may hear summer squash and winter squash. They're both grown in the summer. It's just winter squash has a harder shell, so it stores over the winter. Couple of things you might find commonly is they might not always get pollinated. You have these male flowers that are on a stalk, and the female flowers are what the zucchini is formed on, or whatever kind of squash. So if it starts to grow a little bit and then die from one end, usually that means it wasn't pollinated. So you may not have enough bees. You can plant more flowers to attract bees, or you can go out with a little toothbrush or Q-tip and pollinate them. Powdery mildew is really common at the end of the season. And usually by that time you're sick of squash anyway. But some of that you can wash off to a certain extent, take off the leaves that are getting really affected. And it's almost inevitable because of our climate here. It happens at the end of the season, but you can look for plants that tend to be more resistant to that. So hopefully this is what you'll go out and pick in your garden one day. It's, you know, just fun to just go out and pick stuff for dinner and as I mentioned, share stuff. So I do want to see if we have some questions here. Tiffany, do we have time for a few questions? And I also want to refer you here and in the chat, we have a help desk that you can call with gardening questions. Sorry, we didn't have a lot of time to get to a lot of questions. The field of vegetable gardening is just vast. So Louise, do we have?
We do have quite a few more questions. Is it all right if we keep going?
Yeah, that's totally fine with me. Just in case, though, I'm going to mention if anyone has to go, because we are past the hour, please make sure to fill out our program survey. We really appreciate your feedback to see if you enjoyed it. Also, we would like to mention that, again, our upcoming other Master Gardener program, Virtual Growing Fabulous Citrus, is going to be on April 21st at 4 p.m. And that is also on our events page. But yes, we can definitely take more questions if you guys have the time.
Okay, so we'll just go till 8:15, like about 11 more minutes.
Okay, great. I've got a few. I've picked some of the ones that are kind of more general.
Okay.
Can you comment about, and I guess I'll just go back towards the beginning and then work my way back. Is there a recipe for mixing your own soil for containers? Do you recommend that or not?
Well, it really depends on what you're planting. I mean, you can use just a regular planting mix. We did an experiment in Master Gardeners with carrots, and we did very different soil blends and did a tasting, 14 different varieties of carrots, 3 different soils, so 42 iterations. And we found out that a third native soil, a third compost, and a third perlite. So it really depends on what you're growing. So there are certain vegetables that do well with certain soil blends, things that may have a little more acidic. So but generally just a regular planting mix, and that's what it's called. You mean
potting soil?
Or potting soil. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, you can go online and you can find recipes, but usually it's not that complicated. The plants grow in nature, right? By themselves.
I know I once actually made the mistake when I was first starting gardening myself, and I ended up getting a big bag of compost. I thought it was just that, but no, it's not. It's potting soil you want to, yeah.
Yeah. So mix in some kind of compost, but not planting in pure compost. So I mean, there are all sorts of recipes all over, but
let's see, I just noticed a question here about what do we add to our native clay soil to make it ready for raised beds, and in what proportions, which is a very common type of question that we get.
Is it what's in the raised bed? I mean, the soil underneath it, you don't really have to do anything once you build the raised bed, because the raised bed will be sitting on the soil. Now the roots will go down into there a little bit, but also it's going to soften up as all those kind of nutrients that you're adding going down in. But just some potting soil, planting mix, some compost, and you can even add some native soil in there also.
Generally, our recommendation for amending native soil, our native clay, is to add compost. That's sort of the general thing we usually say is compost. I'm trying to answer this particular question about adding to clay soil.
Yeah, there's planting in the ground or planting in bed. So I think that question kind of mixed both. But yeah, because that compost with our clay soil, it loosens it up, it improves the drainage. It also gives organic material to attract those beneficial organisms that will, dig tunnels and loosen up your soil and break down decomposing matter and just do all sorts of wonderful things. So compost is great. I have about 6 compost bins in my yard, and I just love composting and adding that to my soil.
You know how we plant tomatoes deep with the stem? So someone has asked, is it okay to do that with other vegetables? In particular, the person said that she's heard that squash can be planted deep like that. What other vegetables can be planted deeply like that?
I've never heard squash. I've heard tomatoes, and I've got this picture of that, and chilies, and I've heard some people plant eggplant, but I haven't heard of it with any other vegetable, because they get this crown rot. The stem is usually different from the root, and so if it's piled up, they can get a crown rot and kind of rot at that crown. But there are some vegetables that will grow along that stem, will grow root fibers along there. So Louise, I don't know if you've heard of it being done other than with tomatoes, chilies, and maybe eggplants.
I do not have a good answer to that question. No, I don't. I've only done it with tomatoes.
I used to share an office with a small farm advisor, and he said tomatoes and chilies.
I mean, one thing you can do is you can sacrifice a plant and try planting it deep and see what happens. So it might do great.
One thing that's fun about gardening is experimenting.
Right. There were some questions back during the irrigation comments about how deep are the roots of different vegetables? How deep do we need to get that water down, depending on which vegetable we're talking about?
Well, I mean, you can kind of get some idea of looking at the vegetables. Something small like lettuce isn't going to go deep, but something big like tomatoes will. There's a book that's John Jevons, who's local, wrote a book about how to grow more vegetables than you ever thought in less space. I forget the exact name. I have it in Spanish. I forget the English name. And there are charts in there of how deep the roots go of all different vegetables. So you can actually look up online vegetable depth or find some of these books. In terms of books you can get a general idea by the size of the plant, but there are graphs available that show all of that. In terms of some gardening books, since we're going through the library, couple of things that I would recommend are the Master Gardener Handbook is available to anybody. You can buy that if you're not in the program. You can go to our website and get that. Also, there's a book called Golden Gate Gardening by Pam Pierce. She's working on her 3rd edition now, and that's local. So, local gardening books are really good. The John Jeavons book, if you're interested in doing gardening, as many vegetables as you can in a small space. Those are also good books. Sunset is an also good local plant book where you can find out the needs, the watering needs, the sun needs of all sorts of different plants. So those are some of the books I recommend with an emphasis on local, because our climate's very different. And that's one thing about our Master Gardener program. When we posted in the chat a couple of the links to different varieties, is we do experiments, and we have these trial and demonstration gardens where we will grow different vegetables, all different varieties under different conditions, to see what does best in our particular county, in our soils, in our climate, our humidity. And so getting local resources is really helpful.
So we also had some questions about dealing with vertebrate pests, specifically how do we deal with the squirrels, et cetera, without killing them?
Well, okay, so a couple different things. One is exclusion. So maybe putting some cages or some, slippery metal, protecting the plants when they're young. And you can even just use an old milk carton or a milk jug to put over them, some kind of protection to keep them out. Row covers, and make sure if you're using row covers on the plants that you maybe put rocks or some kind of clips to keep them against the soil so that nothing's escaping under them. So exclusion is one way. Repelling them is another. I mentioned the chili powder, garlic, some of those strong flavored ones repel them. You can trap them, but the thing in California, it's illegal to relocate wildlife. So if you trap them, you either have to release them on your property, and what's the point of that? Or you have to euthanize them, and there are rules about how to do that. They're really, really hard. I was going to tell you one thing I did once, but it's not scientific. Well, this is okay too. Kind of a decoy. So one year I planted sunflowers along the back fence, and they stayed so busy with the sunflower seeds that they didn't come into my garden and bother.
Oh, that's great. That's a really great idea. A decoy.
And I've used that kind of thing a couple of times, for decoys. Like some of the kale can during the summer get a lot of pests. So I have kale in pots that I put away from my garden, the rest of the garden in the summer, and it attracts so many bugs they stay off the other things. So sometimes a decoy. I used to have neighbors who didn't clean up their fruit, and so all the pests stayed over there because there was so much to eat. They didn't bother me. So distracting them with something else can help.
So do you want to take one more?
Sure.
Where do you get seed from?
I save seed a lot. And I should have mentioned in terms of saving seed, so the plants that you can save seeds from are open pollinated plants. So you may hear hybrids, heirlooms, and open pollinated. Heirloom is open pollinated, which means it, kind of pollinates itself. Each other, you can save it. And heirlooms have just been around for a long time. They're different. Some people say it has to be 40 years. Some people say it has to have a family story behind it. But that's what heirlooms mean. It's open pollinated, but they've been around a while. As opposed to hybrids, where two plants are crossed. And we're not talking GMO, we're talking naturally, like Gregor Mendel, where you cross them so that you get the best of both parents. Maybe you have a tomato that's nice and big and another that's sweet, and you cross them to get the best of both. But if you replant seeds from a hybrid, you don't know what you're going to get. It's not controlled. It's first generation. You don't know what you're going to get. You're going to get a tomato, but you don't know what. So if you are going to save seeds, save them from open pollinated, not hybrid. So I save my seeds a lot. I also trade seeds with people. Master Gardeners sometimes will have a seed exchange table. Some of the libraries are having seed libraries where you can go and take some of your seeds and get them. And then I tend to go to local nurseries and get seeds. If I go to a local independent nursery, I know that they're going to have what grows well in our climate, as opposed to a big box store or something like that. This year, for the very first time, I actually ordered seeds through a catalog because I'm sheltering in place and I didn't want to go out to a nursery. But I did it from a local company. So that's where I get my seeds from. How about you, Louise?
I buy my seeds when I do grow vegetables. I usually try to purchase from the same sources that farmers purchase from, because I want to have seed that I know is going to be really high quality.
Okay.
So it just kind of depends, but I use a lot of the catalogs. I have a favorite, but I'm not sure I'm supposed to say.
Yeah.
I haven't been growing a lot of vegetables
Your
this year.
personal one that you go to, that's fine. Yeah.
Right.
Well,
I know,
I would love to stay here all evening and answer your questions, but I know Tiffany wants to close the library. So thank you so much for coming. Please contact our help desk with more of your questions. I wish I could get to more of them.
Yeah, but
Tiffany,
I
thank you.
believe the link was put into the chat about where you can go to put in your questions. Trying to find it quickly. And
Yeah, I'll post the help desk link one more time.
okay, yeah, thank you. Just one more time. All right. But thank you all for joining us tonight. And thank you so much, Laura and Louise, for doing this program. Yeah, there's a lot of gardeners out there right now, so we really appreciate you providing so much information and also giving us a way to ask more questions later. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
All right, good night. Bye.
Good night. Thank you.